Marwa Osman is joining us right now on the live link from Lebanon. Marwa, I really appreciate you making the time to join us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to your show, Patrick. It's truly interesting times, and I couldn't be happier to be joining you to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Marwa. And there's a lot of things to cover, really. And we haven't really had an interview on camera since this latest phase of the conflict, the violence, which has become an ongoing genocide. Well, it was before. It's only now that the world has discovered it in Gaza. But just to start off, Marwa, just give us your general feelings and observations of where we're at from October 7th now, how things have changed, the Palestinian situation, the Israeli situation. Then we'll get into talking about some amazing developments that have shocked and surprised a lot of people regarding Hezbollah and what they've been able to achieve in the south portion of Lebanon there. But go ahead, Marwa.
First of all, thank you very much, Patrick, for allowing me to have my voice heard right here on your platform. I would like to begin, before we start analyzing the geopolitical scene and what has been happening on the field. The first thing that I always start with is the numbers in Gaza, because it's horrific and the people should know about it. It's day 260 of the ongoing genocide since October the 7th. That Zionist Israel decided, alongside with its allies in the United States of America, the UK, and the rest of Europe, to basically annihilate the people of Gaza for having a choice to resist after being for 17 years under siege, aerial, sea, and land siege, not being able to live properly, not even having the right to exist. And when they decided to retaliate with resistance, what happened is that Zionist Israel decided to start a new genocide, something even more horrific than what we have read about in the Nakba in the 1940s or in the 1960s. And so far, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, the numbers have exceeded 37,000 martyrs, civilian population killed in this ongoing genocide, half of whom, 15,000 plus, are children. And we're talking about more than 110,000 injuries, with also more than half of whom are children with no limbs, who have lost their limbs, basically. We're also talking about thousands of orphans. We're talking about thousands of buildings, of infrastructure that have been completely decimated by the Zionist entity. We're talking about 75 to 80%, and these numbers are found on Euromed. It's not my numbers. You can find them with the Ministry of, with the official government of Gaza and the Ministry of Health of Gaza and Euromed as well. We're talking about more than 75 to 80% of the residential areas in Gaza completely destroyed. We're not talking about half destruction or partially destroyed. No, we're talking about completely destroyed, uninhabitable areas. We're talking about hundreds of thousands under the risk of starvation. We have kids who are passing because of malnutrition and of dehydration. We have complete refugee camps being still bombed. The last of which were the Nusayrat camp. I'm not talking about the Nusayrat camp of May 26th. I'm talking about Nusayrat camp of this week on Tuesday, when they bombed again the Nusayrat camp and killed at least, as I read from the Ministry of Health in Gaza, 70 humans have been killed thus far throughout this week. In Nusayrat alone, we're not talking about Khan Yunis or the northern part of Gaza. Other than that, we should also remind the people of what happened on Nusayrat when, during this horrific genocide, when actual ceasefire happened, the number of hostages that were, or captives, as I like to call them, because they are military captives, the number of captives that were released, part of whom were actually civilian, or what we call colonial settlers of Zionist Israel, and the majority being part of the military, they were released under a ceasefire, under negotiations and dialogue. And when the US decided to interfere and use the humanitarian pier in Gaza, in the heart of Gaza, which supposedly they erected in order to help the people of Gaza have food and medicine, They used it to get in special forces alongside with the Israeli occupation forces to kill 270 Palestinian civilians, most of whom are children. And the videos are there for you to watch. I couldn't bear watching a couple when I was shooting my show Expose last week, and it gave me a nervous breakdown. I can't see any more of this footage because it breaks my heart to see young 7, 8-year-olds without limbs dead in the streets because the US decided to get involved and ride in an aid truck and kill humans in order to free four captives, killing 270, when in reality, when there's a ceasefire, they can have all of their captives back to their settler colonial settlements and whatnot. So as to what's happening in Gaza, it's a complete genocide. It is something that the entire humanitarian NGOs, the entire humanitarian world, the international community should be ashamed of, because they are part of this genocide. They are complicit in this genocide because they didn't exert enough pressure to make the establishments in the West stop the constant support for Zionist Israel, and did not also stop the UK and US from supporting Zionist Israel with the weaponry that it has been using to kill civilians in Gaza and in South Lebanon, but in Gaza in specific. So that's basically how things have been going on for 260 days now in Gaza. And despite that, despite the horrific scene, despite the intense humanitarian catastrophe, the resistance in Gaza is still up and running, and everything that is being said by the government of Netanyahu is nothing but lies, and it is not up to me to say it, it's up to the field to say it. Just at the beginning of this week, we saw multiple operations, one with a Tiger, a Nimr, a Tiger vehicle, military armored vehicle that was attacked by the resistance in Gaza, and 8 IOF personnel were burnt inside of it. And we also saw prior to that another very important operation that happened that targeted, according to the information from the resistance, it targeted and killed more than 30 IDF or IOF soldiers. Obviously, the spokesman of the IOF always does not speak the truth and does not say the real number of casualties for the Zionist entity, but this just happened at the beginning of this week. So you can imagine 8.5 months later, and the resistance is yet to stop resisting. They continue the resistance despite the decimation and the genocide. And Zionist Israel is telling the world, we still have only 4 battalions to take out in Rafah. We can just take them out and we can announce full victory, and that's a complete lie. So that's basically what has been going on in Gaza. But to speak at the military level and at the strategic level, the Zionist Israeli entity has completely failed to achieve any of its announced targets or its covert targets. They have their announced and unannounced targets. They failed to achieve any of it. The only thing that they were able to do is destruction and more destruction, killing of civilians. Militarily speaking, if you get someone from the United States of America, the biggest ally of Israel, to tell you that Israel actually succeeded in anything, I'd give you the world. You will not find a current general in the US Army that could tell you that there was a success in any of the military escalation and the military advancement that Zionist Israel pretends it succeeded in doing, or it did in Gaza. On the other hand, the humanitarian factor is devastating, and it needs to stop immediately.
This is a key point that you're making here, Marwa, is that the whole sales pitch, if you will, that the Israeli government is giving to its own public, to the world, to the United States, and what the United States is giving back to U.S. citizens in Europe, is that this is a war against Hamas. And we need to eliminate Hamas. This is basically the fundamental underpinnings of their argument to justify the extreme measures that they've taken. And of course, this is because of what happened on October 7th. Never again, hashtag never again, can't happen again. So they're saying we're eliminating the resistance. But what is the true picture? Because have they eliminated any of the resistance in terms of Hamas, or is it possible that the resistance will actually become stronger as a result of what has happened, making Israel's problems compounded going forward, as well as the United States. What is the status of the resistance in Gaza?
Well, let me begin by telling you, Patrick, that before October 7 and before this genocide that Israel decided to commit against the people of Palestine and Gaza and in the West Bank, by the way, because they've been killing people and children on the streets in the West Bank since October 7 and even before that. But going back to what we're talking about, everything in life has its benefits. Yes, despite the fact that there's a genocide, but the maybe the only positive side of this is that the world opened its eyes to the horrific entity that the Zionist entity is, really the occupation that it is, the apartheid state that it is, the complete racist regime that it is. And when I say this, I mean by the fact that the people have seen the devastation and then they started critically thinking on their own and asking very important questions like, if this has been happening for many decades, can you imagine what the youngster who was born in 2005 or after 2005 and saw the horrific siege and the bombardment, the continuous bombardment and aggression against the Gaza Strip, how he would have grown up and what he would have chosen to be? Hence, he became part of the resistance. I think that the current genocide in Palestine opened the eyes of the world to what it is, to what it means to be resistance, where the resistance comes from. They are not mercenaries coming from outside. Gaza is completely under siege. These are Palestinian civilians who chose to take arms to protect their families, their businesses, their lives, which are all under siege and under blockade. So they decided to breathe, and the only way for them to breathe was to fire back at the fire that was being put against them. I mean, they couldn't even fish. They couldn't even find enough miles to go out and sea and try to find their daily meat in order to eat. According to international law, they're allowed 12 nautical miles, but Zionist Israel's only allowed them 3 nautical miles, and most of the time it would shoot to kill the people who would dare go out at sea, the fishermen and whatnot, who would dare to go and find something to eat. The same thing with the with agriculture, with the farmers in Gaza. We all saw what happened during the Great March that happened 3 or 4 years ago, and what happened after it in the Sword of Al-Quds, and after it in the unity of battlefields, and after it in the Dir' al-Quds, I think it's called the Shield of Al-Quds. And all of these were battles that were fought between the resistance in Palestine and Gaza and the Israeli entity, and it was not only Hamas, and this is where I want to end off with. Hamas is the word, the terminology that is being used in the international community and international law and on TV stations to say that this is the big boogeyman, the terrorist that we are trying to take out. But Hamas is only 65 to 70%, 65% to 70% of the actual resistance forces on the ground in Gaza. You still have the Islamic Jihad, you have the Popular Mobilization, you have the Popular Front, you have the certain Islamic movements and the Muslim Brotherhood movements who are also part of the resistance. We're talking about at least 7 or 8 factions in the resistance that are all armed with diverse amounts of armament and kinds of armament against Zionist Israel. So it's not only Hamas that is the resistance in Gaza, but Hamas is the majority of the resistance, and which has most of the capabilities in Gaza. So when you hear Netanyahu, for example, saying that we will not stop until we annihilate Hamas, but Hamas is not the only faction. It's not the only faction of resistance that is fighting in Gaza. And what do you mean by annihilating Hamas? Hamas is the people, and the people are Hamas. Are you going to kill all 2.5 million? You already killed around 40,000 of them. You want to continue and kill all 1.5 million humans? Actually, they are 2.3 million, but a lot of them were able to leave during the ceasefire, and a lot of them are paying a lot of money to leave through the Rafah border. Shame on every Egyptian who's watching this and allowing this to happen. Egyptian military men taking money from people in Gaza who are under siege and genocide in order for them to flee and have a good life for their families. So A lot of them have already left, but there are millions still. I think it's 1.7 million, if I'm not mistaken, but let's take the average and say 1.2 to 1.4 million. So we want to kill all of these people. This is how we're going to annihilate Hamas. It's the same question. How are you going to get rid of Hezbollah? We'll talk about this later on in the show. I mean, how are you going to get rid of the people in South Lebanon? Because South Lebanon is Hezbollah and Hezbollah is South Lebanon. Are you going to kill all 3 million humans living in the southern part of Beirut all the way to the southern part of Lebanon? What kind of a plan do you have except annihilation, genocide, killing? There's a very important question that everyone should be asking. Why is Israel not allowing any journalists, not even pro-Israeli journalists, to enter Gaza? Because no sane human being would go inside and see the horrors and would maintain their capacity to support Israel. Absolutely impossible. There's no factor inside of your humanity that would stand in the face of all of this destruction and all of this devastation. And if you just look at I was watching this morning a video by an American nurse who specialized in burn victims, and her eyes were just pouring. She was crying her eyes out because of what she saw during her 8 weeks in Gaza trying to help out the people. She couldn't comprehend. Her brain just froze. She couldn't do anything except cry for the fate of these youngsters who were burned. Basically, more than 80% of their bodies burned. She was talking specifically about one of the boys. He was 8 years old and he was without arms, without legs. She was talking to herself and asking herself, like, why is he still alive? If there is some sort of mercy, this boy should not be alive. But at the same time, why are we talking about this? She would ask, why am I asking, why is a young child not killed? This is the epitome of inhumanity, and it is being represented to the world as something natural, as something that has to be done, as these people being rats and animals, and we can live without them. It's okay if they die, but that's not the case. And I think that the axis of resistance in all of West Asia has proven that by getting involved in this war directly and not standing on the sidelines, unlike other monarchies and certain puppet regimes in West Asia who decided to support Zionist Israel and even meet with its generals in certain parts of the Arab world and basically just submit to whatever the Zionist entity wants of them, whether it's money or military and political support. But on the other hand, we have resistances across the region that have shown steadfastness and readiness to support Palestine and the people in Gaza. And that's what we have been seeing in Lebanon. That's why I've been displaced from my house for the past 260 days. And I'm ready to continue be displaced for the rest of my life if this means freedom for Palestine. We don't care. This is the biggest fight of our lives, and we are ready to take that stand. We can no longer just sit there, Patrick, and allow Israel and America and the UK and the Western part of the world that is not the majority of the world, that is not what the international community is about. We cannot just sit on the sidelines and allow us and allow themselves to kill our people, take our land, and decimate life as we know it, while we just say, oh, well, we can't do anything. No, we can do everything in our power about it. And this is why I'm very proud to say that I'm Lebanese from South Lebanon, and I fully support what Hezbollah is doing.
And you make up a good point. It's worth reiterating, Marwa, is that Hamas or all these armed liberation resistance factions in Gaza or Hezbollah in South Lebanon would not exist today if not for the Israeli occupation in these lands and the violence that's been put on the people there. And this is a natural, the resistance factions and movements are a natural reaction to the violence that was brought upon them and the occupation, the brutal occupation in both cases. So the West scream and have fits about Hamas and Hezbollah. They're labeled terrorist groups by the U.S., Britain, and some other European countries. Not all European countries, by the way, which is interesting. Not everybody does, but they're merely arms resistance or armed liberation struggles, not different than many different armed liberation struggles throughout history. So it's kind of selective, labeling, if you will, that suits the agenda and the interests of the United States, of their beachhead, the Western Imperial beachhead, which is the state of Israel in the region. And by doing this, they basically allow all sorts of, suspension of international law and norms, violence on a scale that we haven't seen before. And I think, Marwa, that the world is really waking up to the distortion that's been allowed to stay in place. And I really feel like it's beginning to crack. And part of that is because things on the ground have changed. Capabilities.
Sure, and if you the issue is a lot of people. I think we went through the late 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s where people basically just stopped reading history. And I think that we pushed them back into going back in time at least 200 years back, where everybody is terrorists, but not the United States of America, not Britain. The Japanese are terrorists, the Chinese are terrorists, the Iraqis are terrorists, the Afghans are terrorists, the Iranians are terrorists, the Armenians are terrorists, the Russians are terrorists. Everyone is a terrorist except Uncle Sam and its friends. And when we say Uncle Sam and its friends, we mean the friends who have had a colonial past. France, Italy, Spain, the UK. But what really shocks me is the Scandinavian countries who supposedly have the real democracies of the world. They have the socialist democracies where they respect people's wishes and people's choices, and yet they still find it inside of themselves to stand with a colonial entity like Zionist Israel. I'm not very surprised with Belgium. We know that Belgium killed at least 10 million Africans throughout its colonization of Africa. But at the same time, it's 2024. We're supposedly fighting for the rights of plants, not only humans. We're fighting for the rights of animals, not only humans, and yet they find it okay inside of themselves to support and to vote alongside Zionist Israel at international platforms. But there's also this very important question where now the Western, the global citizens, but the Western citizens in specific, and we're talking about millennials and Generation Z, because I've lost trust in the movement that was the basic movement against it was the peaceful movement in the 70s and 80s. They all became hawks. They all became warmongering Zionists after they stood in the face of the war in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. They now are the biggest supporters of Israel. The same people who stood against the war in Vietnam and the people who stood against the war in Korea, now they are the same people, the elderly, who support Israel and who think in the most racist ways against the people, the native people of Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria. In our region. And what's very important to me and very interesting to me was to see this movement by the millennials and the Generation Z in specific, the generation that's usually looked upon as if they are lost, they don't know what to do about their future, they have no real viable choice for what. No, they prove to be very responsible. They prove to be that they are capable of reading history, understanding it, and then reading the present and learning about it to be able to work their way through the future. And I was amazed by the level of consciousness and awareness of this group of people. And I was pretty much not very much surprised by how the establishments reacted to those movements and how they cracked down on them and how totalitarianism suddenly took over the streets in the West, the UK, and parts of France as well. And you heard people who have been screaming about freedom of choice and freedom of expression and liberation of the Iranian women who should take off their hijabs because supposedly someone came and put a gun in our heads to wear a hijab. Same people, those same people saying that these movements are Hamas movements. So 1 week, we're getting rid of more battalions and we'll kill them all. And now, no, Hamas is protesting in UCLA and in Chicago and in the British universities. It's Hezbollah movement. Hezbollah, if you are even, if they smell you that you have affiliations with Hezbollah, you wouldn't even get a visa out of Lebanon to go to the West. So it's really funny, but at the same time, it's eye-opening. What we have been saying and what you have been saying, Patrick, at least for the past 20 years, has been, it was being frowned upon and being completely ignored. And now everyone has eyes and ears and they can hear and see what's happening. Really interesting times, but I think this is pushing the establishment to the corner, which means that if you push the beast far enough, expect that it will turn into an absolute monster. And at that point, either the monster completely destroys everything around it, or it regains the control. But from what I'm seeing that the destruction of these establishments is not very far, because it's going to happen from within. It's going to happen from the taxpayers themselves. There's no need for any force to go and invade the United States of America. Who in their right mind would cross oceans to invade the United States of America? It's going to happen from within. Who in their right mind would do something about the complete lack of freedom in the UK? It's going to happen from within. And what I say is, it's the taxpayers, the people, the working class, who have been putting their lives on the line on a daily basis to pay rent just to find a place to sleep at the end of the month. These are the people who are going to regain back the control and the power. Yes, it's going to take some time, but believe it or not, it started in Palestine. Everything started in Palestine. It started 400 years ago, it started 200 years ago, it started 75 years ago, and it's starting again right now. And right here, from the center of the earth, from the Levant.
It's certainly been a wake-up call for the world, and it's shaking the political system in the West, Marwa, in ways that people couldn't possibly imagine. Who would have thought that when we saw the massacres in Jenin just a year ago, and the lack of ability to mobilize opposition to it was, to me, depressing, because I felt in my heart, in my mind, that people just don't care, and this is just going to get swept under the rug like every other similar incident which has been carried out and murder by the IDF in the West Bank or in Gaza. But it's now, this issue it's fragmenting the Democratic Party in the United States, powerful political institution. It's having disastrous effects on European political parties. It's really bringing into the question the ethics, the morals of political leadership in the West like never before. I never thought I'd see, 500,000.
And there's a very important question right here. I think we might like, I don't want to jump into another topic here, but there's a very important question that people in the United States of America, especially who are registered as Democrats, should ask. Why hasn't Biden started his campaign yet? I'll give you a hypothetical answer. There's not going to be an election. There's not going to be I'll remind you when that happens, because there's something that they know right there at the top level in Washington that signals that they know that Biden is not going anywhere. And people in the United States of America should be very wary and concerned about this matter.
You're talking about an escalation in the war, a world war, something along those lines?
Yes, and also something within the borders of the United States itself, because it's like getting ready for a full-blown explosion. And I think you understand what I'm saying when we hear sheriffs, police officers, people who are officials who are supposed to organize and keep order in the communities in the United States, when we see them on TikTok, on videos saying that literally saying we want a felon like Donald Trump in the White House, it means that these people will do anything if their demand is not met.
Well, it'll be very interesting if that did happen, because that would be uncharted territory for the U.S. not to have an election cycle. But certainly it is the most strange and bizarre election season in my lifetime or anybody's lifetime. So I think expect the unexpected. Anything can happen, Marwa. I think you're not hyperbolic to make such speculations in this case. Certainly there's a lot at stake for the United States in terms of its power and control, and of course for Israel as well. Now back to the front. The fight has moved to the north, and you talked about the growing up, and now if you're born after 2005, what life is like in Gaza, in the West Bank, and how that forges the next generation of resistance. Some will argue, Marwa, that the opposite has happened within Israeli society, that they've actually degraded, and their military is degraded, their society is kind of degrading as a result of having this overwhelming deterrence that has changed them into a shell of their former self. I'm going to play you a clip from Sharmeen Narwani, who is editor of The Cradle. She commented on this recently. I want to get your reaction to her statement here. Listen to this.
The Israeli army does not have a tested fighting force. We're seeing a lot of young men, 19 and upward, getting killed in Gaza. If you go to Israel today, young people are more interested in Tinder and going to the beach. It's just how it is. These are not the Zionist fighters of yesteryear who were willing to lose life and limb in order to establish their ideological state. These are very plump and complacent populations that have now had generations of relative peace. Why are they sending these guys who have no experience into the battlefield? You know, how are they going to tackle the fact that the Israeli military has never, ever had a protracted conflict, a war of attrition, since before the establishment of the state in 1948, where they had many, many, many months and even years of conflict gearing up to their seizing of the state. They have never had a war of attrition. Right now, they're entering month 9 of a war of attrition. They have always gambled on short, quick, hard wars. This is no longer in their hands. The enemy is controlling the tempo, and so their active duty soldiers and their reservists just simply don't have what it takes. They don't know these kind of wars.
Okay, Sharmeen, fantastic commentator, of course. What do you think about what she said, Marwa?
I completely, wholeheartedly agree with what Sharmeen said. And I add to it is that they don't understand, these youngsters, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, they don't understand why the Palestinian youngsters their age are fighting so aggressively to gain their freedom and to gain control over their own lives. They don't understand why in Lebanon, where there was nothing happening, absolutely nothing for the past 17 years, complete peaceful atmosphere, why young Lebanese fighters would engage in a war like this one for the sake of Gaza. They can't understand why this is happening, or why kids their age and even older are willing to engage in such a fight in order to see Palestine liberated and in order to see the aggression against Gaza halted and stopped. They don't understand because they completely lost the ideology. The ideology that was brought about with the Haganah terrorist groups that came along and killed Palestinian natives and farmers in the 20s and 30s of last century in order to establish the so-called state of Israel no longer exists as an ideology anymore. And what is great proof of that is what happened 2 weeks ago. Just after Benny Gantz resigned, the day after, we saw a bill that was passed by the war cabinet led by Zionist Netanyahu and pushed by Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, a bill that says that the Hasidic Jews, the conservative, the ultra-Orthodox Jews are not to fight in the army because they were adamant on making it a condition that if you make us fight, we will pick up and leave. We are here only to have 6 or 7 kids and to pray for the safety of Israel. That's it. We are not here to fight for Israel. So even these same reservists and these same soldiers who are fighting, who don't understand from what angle the resistance in fighting, they don't also understand why is it only on their own shoulder and it's their own burden to fight for the safety of Zionist Israel, but not for the ultra-Orthodox Jews, for example. Why there is a young man their age living his life getting a wife, having kids, and supposedly just praying, and he has to go and either lose a limb or lose a life in order to protect that man and for him to continue having more wives and more children. So that's very, very confusing for them. And at the same time, they've never really been in a war like this. And I think Sharmeen made it perfectly clear. Throughout the history of the Zionist entity, there was no balanced war between Israel on one side and its enemy on the other. And the biggest example was the 1967 Naksa, the war that was supposed to happen between Egypt and Syria, but it was obviously certain Arab countries had a treacherous play in that, a treacherous maneuver where they gave all the positions of the Egyptian army, which Zionist Israel, just one day before the attack, took its planes and bombed the entire fleet, the entire warplanes of Egypt, and also started bombing Syria, and Egypt retreated and Syria was left alone. And you know the history of it. So the only time that there was like serious potential of a war of attrition was that in 1967. It ended in 3 days. And since then, Zionist Israel has always been saying that it has an army that cannot be defeated, the army that is an invincible army. But fast forward 2000, Lebanon was able to liberate its land through resistance. Fast forward 2006, Lebanon's biggest wars with Israel, and there was a lot of destruction in Beirut, where I am right now. This was a destroyed area. This was built later on in 2012. Entire destruction, the same way that we saw in Gaza, but on a smaller scale in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And fast forward, we had the mini wars that Israel was involved in Syria, directly fighting against Hezbollah and other forces of resistance. And it showed that it was a complete failure for Zionist Israel, because it was supposedly targeting areas to prevent the accessibility and the reach of certain weaponry to Hezbollah. But as we heard this week, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah saying in his speech that Hezbollah is manufacturing its own weaponry, its own rockets, its own. Actually, he cracked a joke, and he said, if anyone wants to buy drones, we manufacture thousands and thousands of drones, and we're ready to sell them if you care to buy. And I think this is not a joke. I think he's serious, but he said it in a joking manner, because we've seen what the drones of Hezbollah, which are made by Hezbollah, are capable of. But these are obviously engineered in the Islamic Republic of Iran, but the know-how was transferred to the engineers of Hezbollah, hence why we saw Zionist Israel killing so far at least 6 engineers with PhDs, civilians, by the way, civilian engineers who are part of the resistance that were assassinated in South Lebanon over the past 260 days. One of whom had just had his PhD in November. He became a PhD in November, and then he was killed and assassinated by Israel earlier this year. But the main issue here, Patrick, is that Zionist Israel is facing the first war of its existence, which most probably might be the last war of its existence if it chooses to continue with violence. What we heard from the speech of Sayyid Nasrallah this week, if I were an Israeli, God forbid, if I were an Israeli, I would be very, very concerned. If I were an Israeli living in Haifa, watching Haifa on video for 9 minutes, which means that it was recorded over hours and hours and hours, and only a montage of 9 minutes made it to the public eye, I would pack my bag and leave, because this means that Hezbollah knows what it's doing, and it means that the capabilities that Hezbollah has is way, way bigger than what Israel has ever imagined, and especially since the way that Hezbollah has been acting since October 8th. I was actually on October 7 in South Lebanon, and as you know, Patrick, my house is on the border with occupied Palestine and the occupied Golan Heights. I'm on a certain triangle of borders there, which, inshallah, God willing, we will completely erase and go back to before Sykes-Picot Agreement, where there were no borders there to begin with. But I was there, and I watched the very first strike by the resistance forces of Hezbollah on October 8 at 6:45 a.m. in the morning. And I saw it from the window of my bedroom, and I saw them striking the Al-Ramtha and the Ruwaysat al-Alam bases in occupied Syria, in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, and in occupied Lebanese villages as well. And at the beginning, no one thought that it will become this immense. We remained there. We literally were having breakfast, tea, manouche on the balcony, watching what was going on, because it was on the what's known as Mount Hermon, what we call as Jabal al-Sheikh. And we never thought that we would be leaving our house. But that day, I left basically the day after I had I had to record my show in Beirut. But as I was cooking lunch, one of the Israeli strikes, they were using drone strikes at that time on October 8. It landed just 500 meters away from my house on a hill facing my house, and it was traumatizing for the kids. So I had to make a fast decision to just move out of there as soon as possible. And since then, I went out to my house. I went back to my house, and I think there was a ceasefire for 4 or 6 days. I forgot how many days it was. But I went back to my house and decided to prepare that I might not be returning anytime soon. That's how I managed. And we left. But since then, we've been watching closely how Hezbollah has been monitoring and advancing on the battlefield, starting with what people were calling charades and mockery, with Hezbollah targeting what they say they are targeting cell towers. They are targeting mobile towers. Well, when you are an ignorant person and you don't understand that Zionist Israel has technology that most of the European countries don't have, that it has surveillance that covers all the way to Gibraltar and all the way to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and to the Gibraltar Strait. And if you don't understand that half of Europe is actually monitored by Zionist Israel from occupied Palestine, that you don't know, then you don't understand how surveillance works. You don't understand how intelligence works. And we've seen Hezbollah targeting those towers and those surveillance cameras, and targeting those basically floating cameras on board of flying balloons, and targeting sensors that listen, that can hear what's going on miles and miles away. Because how can they operate on the ground without being detected if all of this technology is around them? And I think this is what Sayyid Nasrallah pointed out in his speech this week, that what really shocked the Israeli establishment, the Israeli regime, is not that Hamas had the audacity to perform this glorious operation called the Al-Aqsa Flood Operation, but what astonished them, what really surprised them, was the capability of Hamas to bypass all of this technology that is erected all around Gaza, even from the Egyptian side, even from the desert side, even from the Mediterranean side. They couldn't understand how Hamas and how the resistance in Gaza was able to bypass all of this and continue with their operation. And I think if I were them, I would be surprised as well. And hence why we saw Hezbollah targeting these posts first. And then we started seeing targets happening at a depth of 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. The deepest was 70 kilometers into Safad and further than Safad, in areas where the occupied entity has major aerial military bases and major intelligence bases as well. And we have seen so far that Hezbollah was strictly targeting military posts. But with the video that we all watched at the beginning of this week, we can completely and 100% say that Hezbollah is capable and can and currently might be willing to target civilian, so-called civilian targets. When we watched in that video, in the Hupo 9-minute video, we watch malls, city centers, we watched the cities, we watched cars being surveilled from the air, and we saw the electricity company of Haifa. We saw, so these are civilian targets, not military targets. And by sending this video, I think that Hezbollah said that, look, not only are we ready, but we have precision missiles that can target these specific positions. And Sayyid Nasrallah said this week that each drone and each missile will land in a specific target. It's no longer the way that Katyusha used to be operated with in the late 90s and the early 2000s, where they land in open areas. No. We've seen what guided missiles can do. We've literally seen how soldiers of the IOF were turned into dust because of the guided missiles of Hezbollah in the video of 2 weeks ago. So we've seen it firsthand, and Zionist Israel cannot lie about this. This is something that they cannot lie about. And this is what is making it really pressuring for the war cabinet to decide on an all-out open war, because they cannot control the consequences of this war. Despite the fact that in the heart of this week, in the middle of this week, we saw certain movement of U.S. military assets into the Mediterranean, into coming nearer to the port of Haifa, but that doesn't mean that they are safe. I mean, we saw what happened to the USS Eisenhower and other ships in the Red Sea and in the Indian Ocean and in the Bab el-Mandeb. I mean, if those fleets were not able to handle the firepower of the Yemeni Ansarullah, can they imagine what Hezbollah can do? They still don't believe the capability of Hezbollah. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah warned Cyprus. He literally warned Cyprus. He said, look, when and if the war starts with Zionist Israel knows that we will be targeting its airports, so they wouldn't be able to fly with their F-16s, F-15s, and F-35s. But Zionist Israel has been doing military drills in Cyprus and will most probably use the airports of Cyprus, just like the UK used the airports of Cyprus to take off and go bomb Yemen. We all saw that on TV. Sayyid Nasrallah said, we tell Cyprus that if we see or know or get intelligence that Zionist Israel is flying its war jets from Cyprus airports, we will consider Cyprus complicit in this war, meaning that the firepower of Hezbollah that can reach all the way to Rashrash, which is more than 350 kilometers away from the southern part of Lebanon, Cyprus is just right there.
Yeah. So in 2006, I think Hezbollah demonstrated back then that it's able to defend South Lebanon effectively against the IDF, but they didn't have the missile technology or the capability, the drone capability. So now any reciprocal move that Israel makes against Lebanon, civilian targets, airport, Hezbollah has the ability, the capability to counter that, and accurately. And so this is a game changer, because Israel's never been in a position of taking losses, significant infrastructure losses, military-based losses within Israel. And it's created a complete new dynamic in terms of how they have to consider. So we hear the threats, we hear all the rhetoric, but I think deep down they realize that the game has changed significantly. I've got some of that drone footage that Hezbollah released at the beginning of this week. I'm going to play some highlights of that, and then I'm going to get the comments from another Middle East expert on what we've just seen here. Let me roll this. mean, Marwa, this has to be viewed as a very ominous warning to Israel. Hala Jaber is a fantastic author from Lebanon, a great journalist. Here's what she said as to what we had just witnessed there this week. Let me put this tweet up on screen. A most embarrassing and humiliating day for Israel and Netanyahu and his military brass. Hezbollah drone soaring leisurely in the skies of northern Israel, filming strategic military facilities and installations, including water reservoirs, oil tank reserves, military industrial installations, petrochemical facilities, air defense missile storage facilities, Haifa power plant, port, and airport. The drone also flew undisturbed over the Iron Domes, David Sling, Arrow 3 battery installations, capturing images and locations, including street footage and views of residential settlements, commercial centers in the nearby city of Krayat, located 26 kilometers from the Lebanese border, north of the coast of Haifa, and which encompasses 6 settlements. According to Hezbollah's video, over 260,000 settlers reside in Krayat settlements, Marwa. And, many of the settlers have emptied the northern occupied territories because it's just not safe, hasn't been safe for them for months. And I don't think they're ever coming back, quite frankly. And those numbers are just increasing. The exodus is increasing. And isn't this the whole basis of the Israeli dream, how they market this to Americans? Come to Israel. We have kibbutzes, we have settlements. You'll be protected
and live the dream
by the all-powerful IDF and our omnipotent intelligence machine. And you'll be protected. You have a swimming pool, your own house, and we'll have some olive groves that used to be Palestinians, but we've got rid of them. And so that whole idea of the Israeli dream is really shattered, especially in the northern territories. Your comments on what you've just
I was joking the other. I completely agree with what Hala wrote on X, and I was just joking last night before I went to sleep about what Hochstein, the Israeli American mediator that is being sent by the Biden administration, who fought with the Israeli occupation forces at some point, who supposedly, according to the Lebanese law, is not supposed to enter Lebanese land, but that's not the case that we're discussing right now. Hochstein came to Lebanon just 3 days ago, and he had a message saying that Lebanon needs to demilitarize the southern part of Lebanon up until the Litani River. And I laughed out loud because it is the northern part of Palestine that has been completely emptied because of Hezbollah, because of the resistance, with more than 220,000 colonial settlers who have left the northern part of occupied Palestine, and wanted to demilitarize the area where people during the holiday of Eid al-Adha at the beginning of this week, under Israeli fire, decided to go back to their houses under fire to visit the graveyard because their loved ones are buried in that land, and to wish one another a happy Eid. You want to take those people out of their land and demilitarize their resistance? Are you nuts? Do you even know what you're talking about? Do you even understand who these people are? You want me to accept to leave my house and allow some British military man to come as part of a peace mission to erect a tower right in front of my house on the border and live there and not allow me to exist over my dead body? That would happen. Over my dead civilian body, that would happen. I would not allow that to happen. If I am deciding not to go back to my house, it is not because I'm afraid of my own life. First, I'm afraid for the lives of my children. I don't want them to be traumatized the way that I was traumatized at the age of 9. I want them to be living in a very peaceful area where they don't hear bombs. That's one. 2, if I'm not going back home, is to allow the resistance to operate freely, so they wouldn't be concerned about civilians like me residing in areas which are now considered very risky and open fire areas. That's the only reason why I'm not there. Or else it would be my epitome dream, the dream of my lifetime, was not to become a PhD, not to become a mother, not to become anything in this life. It's to die just like the people of Gaza has died, just so I could feel that I actually presented something, stood by them in some way by dying the same way that they died. This is how we live our lives. Where are the Israeli colonial settlers of the north? They either took out their second passport, flew back to wherever they came from, or they decided to go and live in hotels and make the US and UK and European taxpayers pay for their stay at five-star hotels in Tel Aviv. This is where they are. You think these people will return back to the land that they grabbed from Palestinians? Never in a million years. Whoever, even if they pay all the money in the world, who's going to go live where Hezbollah completely decimated the area? This is not new. This has been happening for the past 8 months, but the world has been complicit in turning a blind eye to what Lebanon has been doing to the northern part of Palestine, because it is the only way to make sure that not all of the reservists and all of the soldiers go and continue to kill Palestinians. We wanted to open a front right here in Lebanon to take a bit of the burden in order to help our Palestinian brothers and sisters. They don't understand that we are a people of the same land, that they came along and just drew a map, a line on a map, and started considering us to be Lebanon and them to be Palestine and Syria to be. It is all called Bilad Sham, the Levant. We are all one people. We literally speak the same language with the same dialect, eat the same food, have the same religion. I'm not talking about Muslims only. Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And then we allow colonial powers to come along and decide our future and how we should be living our lives? Absolutely not. The video that you watched and I watched with you, Patrick, is viable evidence that if you are part of the land and you decide to protect that land, you will get there with the help of very good friends, friends who are themselves under sanctions, friends who are able to fire only a couple of hundreds missiles against Zionist Israel, which needed 6 states to defend it. 7 levels of protection for Israel against 300 missiles coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. What will they do when thousands and thousands of missiles rain from South Lebanon? What will they do? How will they be able to protect their settlers? They will not be able to protect their settlers. And it is the consequences of the continuous genocide that they have been committing against Lebanon, against Syria, against Palestine since the 1930s. This is their doing. They are paying the price of what they did to the Palestinian natives, to the Lebanese natives. The man who I always point to and behind my shoulder right here is the man of my family. It's the grandfather of my children. He was in the Lebanese army before and a resistance even existed in South Lebanon. And he was killed in Khiam in South Lebanon because he was defending his land against the Israeli invasion in 1977. This is who we were. This is who we are. And this is who we will continue to be. What will they do? Do they want to turn Beirut into another Gaza? Do they realize that Gaza is only 40% of South Lebanon's size? Do they understand that? Do they know that the kind of missiles that Hezbollah has have to be fired from somewhere as far as the northern part of the Beqa region in Lebanon for it to actually land inside of Palestine instead of landing in Egypt? Do they understand that, or do they not? Do they understand that, yes, we are ready to accept and deal with the destruction that we will face from this Zionist genocidal entity, but at the same time, this time, we will inflict equal or even graver and greater pain. Either they understand this right now and stop the genocide against the Palestinians, hence stopping all other supportive fronts, or they take the other route, the route which we do not want, but we eagerly wait for, which is the route of liberation and complete freedom of the Palestinian land.
And just to reiterate, you're absolutely spot on, Marwa. Within Israeli society, we saw this picture. You also retweeted this during the week. This is a protest, I believe, in Israel. And you can read the signs here, roughly translated, "We have lost the North," they're basically saying. So there's Israelis are lamenting now. They're commiserating over the reality that their northern occupied territories that they've been occupying, that they've effectively lost those. So, I mean, that's coming from the Israeli protest camp there. And I think these are just initial noises you're seeing. I think this is probably going to grow, and as people begin to realize, and this whole this facade, this illusion of security, which is absolutely paramount to the existence of the Israeli entity,
Sure.
and to govern this space, they need to have that idea out. And now it's being shattered, and not only in one place, in multiple places. So
Sure.
I think we're seeing a real sea change here. I don't think people in the West quite understand that aspect of it, but I'll bet you deep down a lot of Israelis do understand their existential crisis right now. Go ahead, Marwa.
Well, I second your ideas here, Patrick, and I think that there's something very important for the people to understand, and very vital for them to completely openly see the situation as it is in Zionist Israel, and the fact that simple drones that were not capable of being intercepted by the most powerful, most expensive interceptive defense systems in the world tells a lot. The fact that we have seen the USS Eisenhower get hit after hit to a point that it's now docked near, if I'm not mistaken, it's near away from Riyadh. Like I think it's 400 kilometers away from Riyadh, to a point that they cannot send in people to maintain it. They need to drag it to Saudi Arabia to do the maintenance. They cannot take it north because it will be recorded and shot and viewed by the world when it enters into the Egyptian waters. And they cannot take it down south because it will be hit again by the Ansarullah resistance movement. If we're seeing the most capable, the most advanced military presence in the world, incapable of moving in front of resistances that are not as capable as Hezbollah, what do you expect will happen if an all-out war happens? What do they expect will happen when we've seen that Hezbollah was capable of not once, not twice, but at least so far 10 times to target the same Meron base, which is the biggest military base in the northern part of our occupied Palestine? What do they expect will happen when for 300 missiles, 3 nuclear powers had to interfere and intercept? Do they have the capability to interfere and intercept more than 3,000 missiles to be fired per day? Can they do that? I don't think the Jordanian interceptive missiles will be able to down any missile coming from Lebanon, because we're literally on top of occupied Palestine. The Iron Dome, it was hit by direct missiles, by guided missiles from Hezbollah. We saw it, how it went on and literally hugged the battery of the Iron Dome. These are billions of dollars worth of weaponry that are paid by U.S. taxpayers, not by the Zionist tax. There's nothing called taxpayers inside of Israel. Israel only knows how to take money. It does not make its own people pay any money. It makes the world pay for the security of its own settlers in occupied Palestine. And despite that, they couldn't do anything about it. We all saw what happened with the UK, the UK fleet. We also what happened to the Finnish fleet. We also what happened also to other European fleets who were targeted by Ansarullah. Can you imagine if they try to come via the Mediterranean, where Hezbollah has the capability to throw rockets and missiles that could land very far, far away in the Mediterranean? Do they understand what will happen from the Syrian side? Because at the beginning of this week, the Israeli entity did a couple of airstrikes on the Quneitra and the Golan, and they killed a Syrian Arab army captain, and they threw pamphlets and leaflets above the Syrian Arab army, warning them not to interfere in the event of a war with Hezbollah. Where were they living for the past 12 years? Who do you think is the biggest ally and supporter of Hezbollah? Where do you think the main battle will take place? Wallahi, I swear to God, not on the border with occupied Palestine. It will happen between the border of occupied Golan Heights and Palestine. This is where the biggest battlefield will happen, because geographically speaking, it's easier to actually ground invade Palestine from there. If they think for a moment that if Hezbollah even senses that Zionist Israel is preparing for a ground invasion with aerial support, if they think that Hezbollah will sit and duck and wait for it, they don't know Hezbollah yet. They need to re-listen, to reread what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said this week. A preemptive strike will happen. The same thing that happened in 2006. Hezbollah will not wait for the Israeli entity to come. A fight will fall. A battlefield will be open. Why don't we start with the first strike then?
Yeah, and the words of Hassan Nasrallah one should heed, because as many have said about him, he's a man who says what he means and means what he says, and he's not going to say anything and waste words. He's very economical with his words, which is why Israeli officials listen extremely closely to his speeches more than they do their own leadership. In fact, if you look at the, probably if you could do the television ratings on that, that would probably bear out. Here's Israel Katz, the Israeli official there, defense maven. And this is what he has to say. I want to get your response to this. This was tweeted out on June 18th this week. Nasrallah boasts today about filming the ports of Haifa operated by international companies from China and India, and threatens to attack them. We are very close to the moment of decision to change the rules against Hezbollah and Lebanon. In an all-out war, Hezbollah will be destroyed and Lebanon will be severely hit. The state of Israel will pay a price on the front line and home fronts, but with strong and united nation and the full power of the IDF, we will restore security to the residents of the North, says Israel Katz. A very bold statement, Marwa. I know you're trying to contain your, I don't know, skepticism as to the word reading there, but what's your reaction to that?
Let's start with what residents of the North? There is no residents in the North. That's one. Number two, what IDF power is he talking about? They were not able to take 365 square kilometers of Gaza. I'm not demeaning Gaza. I'm just saying that the size of Gaza is literally 30 to 40% of the size of only southern Lebanon. Number three, excuse me, they want to destroy all of Lebanon? How? With what power? With what planes? With what airports? With what fuel? With what weaponry? If the resistance will be targeting the aid that will be coming to the ports of Zionist Israel. Yes, they have the capability to do some destruction, but not, if they even think about having a destruction similar to the 2006 era, they will be delusional. They really don't understand what's going on and from where Hezbollah would be entering into the upper Galilee. They don't understand how things are going to escalate and how things are going to happen. Sayyid Nasrallah was saying this week that 2 years ago, he said in one of his speeches that Hezbollah has 100,000 soldiers. And he said that at the time when he said it, it was more than 100,000, but he was trying to give a lower number. Today, at the time, right now, if something is to happen, Hezbollah has more than 600,000 members. 600,000, to a point that members who are part of Hezbollah are fighting with their leadership because they want to take part in that battle, and there's no space for them. They are not yet needed. And according to Sayyid Nasrallah himself, they might never be needed in full capacity. They said, he said in his speech that he got phone calls from Iran, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Syria, saying that members of the resistance and of the armies of these states want to send tens of thousands of fighters to invade. And he said, thank you, but we don't need them. We're not going to need them because we're not even going to be using all of our manpower. It's very important to know something very, very vital about how Hezbollah operates. They think strategically. They don't fire a missile if they don't know where that missile is going to land. And their ideology is based on presenting sacrifice. Where is that ideology within the IDF or whatnot? Where is that ideology? Where is it where you find the family members of IOF soldiers killed in the battlefield accepting congratulations for the passing of their kids? Where? Only in the ideology of Hezbollah, where we accept congratulations because we firmly believe that the people that fall on our side are rising to the highest levels of paradise. Has it not been for this level of ideology and belief system that Hezbollah has, they would have never been able to stand in the face of Israel, because throughout the years, hell for the people of the South. They gave up everything just to have dignity left. And they regained that dignity with the liberation and regained more dignity after the 2006 victory in Lebanon. Yes, there will be destruction, but wallahi, it will not take more than 1 month and we will see the entire system of institutionalized system of the Zionist entity collapsing. Unity? What unity is he talking about? What is the unity that Katz is talking about? Benny Gantz and Eisenkot resigned. Today, I think I was reading this article about a fight that happened at the beginning of the week between Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, because every time there is a big secret meeting for the war cabinet, everything that is being said in that meeting is completely leaked to the media, to a point that the people of Netanyahu decided to put Ben Gvir, decided to put him under a lie detecting test. And that's within the coalition that is supposedly allied with one another. So what is it about? Look at Benny Gantz. What did he do on day 3 of his resignation? He went down and took part in the protests demanding a ceasefire. That's Benny Gantz. That's the leader of the opposition. What unity is he talking about? A unity that actually diversifies and completely differentiates between the Hasidic Jews and the secular Jews, who demands the secular Jews to go and fight and die for Israel, and no one should touch the Orthodox Jews because they're there just to pray? What kind of unity is he talking about? Has he lived in Israel for the past 57 or more? I think it's now 70 weeks. For the past 70 weeks, has he lived there? Because for 51 weeks before the war on Gaza, there were complete vertical fracture in the Israeli society, with people who want amendments in their judicial systems and people who didn't want amendments in their judicial systems. People who were fighting and killing one another in the streets. Did he watch those videos like we did? What unity is he talking about? On the other hand, yes, Lebanon is not fully united behind the resistance, but the majority of the Lebanese people are completely behind their resistance. And we're talking about the communities that are there on the front line. And if it weren't for those communities, where would Hezbollah bring the 600,000 fighters?
The unity that they claim they have, I think you're right, Marwa. This was already beginning to fall to pieces over a year ago. And so I think they're in a terrible situation where they're locked into a death spiral, as it were, because the longer this war goes on, the more their reputation degrades internationally and in the neighborhood of nations. And the only way they can survive politically is to continue the war and to continue the killing. Right. And so either way, it's going to the backlash is going to be severe, and they're really sowing the seeds, in my opinion, and I'm sure you're not going to disagree, they're sowing the seeds of their own demise as a legitimate political entity, as a legitimate state. And I think that
either way, whatever happens, Patrick, the only way for this to completely end is a one democratic state of Palestine. Anyone who calls for a two-state solution can kindly co-play some chess or find a video game and play with it. Anyone who calls for the continuation of the occupation on Palestinian people can find another spot and play player 2 in the same video game as the people who'd ask for two-state solutions. The only way for this to stop is with a one democratic state of Palestine. And Palestine can then decide whether or not it would allow any other entity or any other nationality on its land by giving people visas or residencies. Other than that, The road to liberation is right there. We will never leave it. You think that Palestinians who have lost 40,000 of their loved ones will stop right now? I have a friend who I met in Tehran about 4 weeks ago. She's a journalist in Gaza for the Al-Alam Arabic channel. She's lost everything. She's lost 60 of her family members. She's lost her mother-in-law. She's lost her brothers. She's lost all of her life. And she managed to take her family to Egypt. When she landed in Iran and we were together in this certain festival that we attended, the first question that I asked her is, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going back to Gaza. It's like, but you don't have anything left there. She said, we will rebuild. How can you defeat such people? You can never defeat them. Plus, Israel right now is at a crossroads. Either they accept that they lost and that history will completely hold them responsible for the genocide that they committed against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. Stop right now and find a vital solution that can actually help out both sides, or they can continue doing what they do and they could pay the price, and it's going to be a very heavy price.
The end of Israel as they end the
as
world.
we know it, yeah.
In terms of the broader scope of history, as you were explaining earlier in this, and just the other thing, of course, is you were talking about the commitment, the idea that anybody who dies in this cause is a righteous cause, and that they will be venerated by community and by God as well. I mean, when I visited South Lebanon back years ago and was lucky enough, the Nabatea and Melita to be able to go into the tunnels where Hezbollah defeated Israel in 2006, and to see within the tunnel structure, you had the various rooms, but there was a large prayer room as well.
Prayer room.
And so they never would lose touch. There's a spiritual element, I think, that the West constantly underestimates, doesn't understand, will not acknowledge, and to realize that that's actually the central component of it, and that there is a greater sort of purpose for humanity that's in their doctrine. And this is the same with the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's their interest in the Palestinian issue. And I think with Ansar Allah in Yemen, it's the same thing. The West has to come to grips with the fact that there's actually a moral crusade on behalf of humanity, and this is what is motivating and driving the axis of resistance. And I think until they understand this, I think they're going to have a very difficult time, because they're trying to calculate everything in terms of their own Western machinations of what power is and domination, and that's not actually what's happening on the side of the axis of resistance. And that's a big
and they're missing out that the rest of the world is combining their efforts and uniting against the system of power or unipolar power in the hands of the United States of America. I mean, if they continue on this road, especially in West Asia and in Ukraine, I don't think only Israel will be facing its demise. There are many European and Western regimes which will, at the end of all of this bloodshed, will see that they are left alone. They will not find people to rule, because the people will overthrow them and will completely stand a very important historic position that says, no, we won't allow you to drain us, to take away our lifeline, our the essence of our hard work, to buy bullets and to buy shells and to buy bombs and go kill people at least 9,000 or 10,000 miles away, while we pay the price economically and we pay the price by losing our own children. I mean, if you are a man in Kentucky or in Illinois and you have your son in the Marines or your daughter in the U.S. Army and she's being fired at in the Red Sea, how can you not see that your daughter is doing the assault, that your son is actually the aggressor? What are they doing 12,000 miles away from the shores of the United States of America? How can you accept for your government to take away your sons and your daughters to fight off natives in their own lands? Would you accept other people to send their sons and their daughters to the shores of the United States of America to kill you? Well, why, if it is not okay by you, but it should be okay by us? Just think about it. Why is it always that everyone else is the bad guy, but you are the good guy? No, you're not. Even if you're living in the highest mountains of Montana, you are complicit in genocide because you're not stopping your establishment from providing weaponry for the Zionist entity to continue killing the people, because it's made in the USA, signed by the people like Nimrata, by Nikki Haley. What do you expect? What do you expect from the people that have been suffering for decades and decades under bombs made and paid by you and your ancestors? What do you expect them to just sit and take the bomb? I mean, come on. People should be waking up by now.
Marwa Osman, thank you for joining us this week. This has been an amazing segment, and you're a great journalist and a great presenter. Your program, Mideastream, has been very informative to many, many people over the last couple of years. So, Marwa, we're going to point people to your social media feed. They should be following you on X, Twitter, as well as watching your programs, which you post regularly as well.
Yeah.
And again,
and on Telegram, because I don't know when X will kick me out.
Yeah, good point. So you do have a good Telegram presence as well.
Yeah.
So we'll try to drop those links into the post when we do put that out on the other platforms. But again, thank you for your time, Marwa. We're going to say goodbye and continue on to our next segment. But thank you very much again, Marwa Osman, live from Lebanon. All the best.
Thank you.
There she goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is a tremendous, unvarnished, unfiltered view of what's happening in the world, in the Middle East, the likes of which you will only get from Marwa Osman. I can tell you that for sure. We've had many interviews with her over the years, and everything that she has learned and everything that she understands has really culminated in this point in history, and she has extreme clarity on these issues, I think, better than a lot of journalists do, especially somebody who is so close to the conflict as well in South Lebanon. So we wish her all the best.